Hi, my name is Jessica Stewart, and I'm a special education teacher working for the Allegheny Intermediate Unit DART program in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. The DART program provides early intervention services to students between the ages of 3 and 5 that display an eligible delay. I'm certified to teach general education to the students between the ages of pre-K and 4th grade and special education to students in pre-K through 12th grade. I'm currently working towards my master's degree in special education with an emphasis in autism, and in my undergrad I had a minor in English with an emphasis in English education. I'm an itinerant teacher, seeing my students once per week in their home, daycare, or preschool setting. Since the shutdown, it has become increasingly difficult to reach our students in a meaningful way. The most successful strategy that I have found so far is entering the homes of my students through the power of the Read-Aloud. According to Beginning to Read in 1991, children from middle-class families are exposed to 1,000 to 1,700 hours of one-on-one picture reading time on average. In contrast, the average child growing up in a low-income household is exposed to only 25 hours of one-on-one reading time. All year, we have built relationships with our students, and in one fell swoop, their lives have been completely upended and cut off from their educational lives as they once knew them. However, I have found the ability to reconnect with my students, both visually and emotionally, through Read-Alouds. I've recorded myself reading some physical books from my personal collection, and my families were very pleased with it. When the book or topic I wanted to share was not accessible, I supported my local library by borrowing the book I wanted on the Libby app and recording myself reading it that way. When I shared stories read by other people, my families enjoyed it, but they said that their children did not resonate nearly enough with those stories, especially compared to the stories that I sent home when I read them. So, since then, that's what I've been doing. For preschool, my best advice is to try to insert yourself into your students' activities of daily living. You can support bedtime, personal hygiene, bathrooming, and more. According to Denton and West in 2002, children who were read to at least 3 times a week by family members were almost twice as likely to score in the top 25% of reading scores compared to children who were read to less than 3 times a week. In this time when many of our families have 1 or 2 parents who are considered essential workers, our students could easily fall through the cracks. We may not be family members in the literal sense of the word, but I and many of my fellow educators truly consider our students to be our family. So I try to send out 3 stories each week, 1 educational story, 1 adaptive story, and 1 fun story. One of my favorite ways to target emotions is through The Color Monster by Anna Lanus, a story about emotions. This is the story of a monster who is all jumbled up with a bunch of different colors and emotions, and his friend offers to help him sort them out and put them in different jars. This is particularly helpful for our students who are still working on identifying and categorizing their own emotions. One book I like to share for behavior is No, David by David Shannon. David Shannon is actually diagnosed with ADHD, and he wrote this book when he was 5. Then he found it in a closet many years later and decided to publish it. In No, David, David makes a few bad choices, but in the end, his mother welcomes her into his arms and tells him that she still loves him. This is great for our students because it reminds them that even if they make bad choices, they're still loved. And during this time of uncertainty, our students may be more prone to making bad choices. My fun book is How to Catch a Dinosaur by Adam Wallace and Andy Algerton. Throughout the book, a group of students who are trying to win the science fair try to catch a dinosaur. They set traps and they follow clues to try and find him. And in many of the pictures, you can see the dinosaur hidden somewhere. So my students and I try to find the dinosaur. Also, this book is written in a rhyming pattern, so we work on meter and poetry during the reading of this book. This is a series, so you can also try to catch a mermaid, an elf, a unicorn, and many more different creatures. For an adaptive book, my students and I read P-O-T-T-Y, which is a whole book written to be sung to the tune of Bingo Was His Name-O. In 2017, 14% of Pennsylvania's special education population had a primary disability of speech and language impairment. That is 37,841 students in the K-12 population. Students are more likely to develop language skills and experience an increase in vocabulary when they're read to by someone else. By demonstrating fluency and correct grammar, we can help students internalize those skills for themselves. One of my favorite picture books to read to elementary students is The Good Egg by Jory John and Pete Oswald. You might recognize that name because Jory John also wrote The Bad Seed and the Cool Bean. In the good egg tries as hard as he can to be a good egg, even though he is in a carton surrounded by bad eggs. In fact, he worries so much about what the bad eggs are doing that eventually he cracks. He has to take a step back and figure out how he can enjoy his life without cracking. And he realizes that he can have fun too. Another picture book that I love to share is Guess Again by Mac Barnett. In this story, we're given clues to try and guess what's hiding in the pictures, but not everything is always as it seems. For instance, one of the pages, they say, he's got long whiskers, and what's that? Why, you've guessed it, it's my, looks like it could be a cat or a kitten maybe, and then we turn the page, and it's Grandpa Ned. So your students can have a blast trying to figure out what they're guessing and figure out what rhymes with the different words. For early learning with chapter books, I love the Chet Gecko series. This is The Chameleon Wore Chartreuse, and in these books, the students can work to figure out a mystery and solve crimes with, you guessed it, Chet Gecko. For older grades in picture books or chapter books, I love to share Frindle by Andrew Clements. In this story, Nick tries to make his 5th grade teacher upset by calling a pen a frindle. First, it catches on in his class, then his school, but it continues to spread like wildfire, and it has consequences that Nick never saw coming. For middle and high schoolers, you can choose to read a chapter of a book each day, every other day, or just at your own frequency. This helps to keep a love of reading alive with your students, as well as bridging the gap that has grown between you, their teacher, and the educational content that you're posting online. You can record 1 chapter a day or do a bunch at once to knock them out when you're dressed your best. Another wonderful option that is often overlooked for older students is picture books. Remember, you're using this as a connection technique and just spending virtual time with your students during this crazy time. More important than anything, however, is choosing a story that you love so that it comes through to your students in your inflection and expression. If you choose to go with picture books, an extension activity can be to ask students to record themselves reading a short book that they love with you and the rest of the class. If you have a student set on sharing their favorite chapter book, invite them to read the first chapter to try and convince their peers to finish reading the book on their own. If you have non-readers, invite a family member to do the reading, but make sure that the student is still involved and present in the video to help build a sense of an inclusive and safe environment, even in a virtual classroom. Middle school, one of my favorite novels is The Island of the Blue Dolphins by Scott Odell. It's a story of a girl stranded on an island who finally stops waiting for someone to rescue her and starts rebuilding the life that she once knew. Another wonderful option is Crash by Jerry Spinelli. The main character, Crash, loves crashing into things and other people, but most of all, he loves crashing into his next-door neighbor, who he bullies relentlessly. By the end of the book, they realize that they have more in common than they ever thought they would. As far as graphic novels, one of my favorites is El Deafo by Cece Bell, and it's the story of Cece, who just moved to a public school from a deaf and hard of hearing school. When she finds it hard to fit in due to her clunky phonic ear, she spins the situation and realizes what she has just might be a superpower rather than a hindrance. Another book that's not really a graphic novel are the new illustrated Harry Potter books. This is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, illustrated by Jim Kay. It's the story that we already all know and love, but with the addition of some beautiful illustrations to help keep our students engaged and interested in the story, and this might even convince them to continue reading the rest of the series. When choosing picture books for students in older grades, it's still really important to choose content that is age appropriate. One option is Love by Matthew de la Peña. It describes all the different ways we experience love. It's available in Spanish and it's 40 pages long. Also, Matthew de la Peña writes chapter books, and this just might convince students to give some of his other works a try. Another choice is Barefoot, Escape on the Underground Railroad by Pamela Duncan Edwards. This is the story of a man throughout the book called Barefoot who is escaping and being chased by other men called Heavy Boots. It's the story of how he makes it through the Underground Railroad and the animals that help him along the way. Finally, Malala's Magic Pencil, which is the story of her life, but in picture book form, and this is a great way to introduce her big novel, I Am Malala. For high schoolers, a novel that I love to share is Geography Club by Brent Hardinger. Geography Club is the story of Russell who, in high school, realizes that he's gay. He meets a boy online, and they decide to meet in the park, and it ends up being another boy from his school, but Russell thought there was no way that anyone else in his whole school could be gay. Through the story, he finds a group of friends, and they decide to start a club, but they call it the Geography Club because they want to keep it a secret and they don't think anyone will join. Another great novel for high schoolers is The Watsons Go to Birmingham by Christopher Paul Curtis. This is the story of an African-American family who goes to Birmingham, Alabama in 1963, where there's a terrorist attack at the church that they attend. This is historical fiction as some of the dates are not completely lined up. The last chapter book I want to share for high schoolers is Outcasts United by Warren St. John. And this is the story of a refugee soccer team made up of people from 24 war-torn countries. And this is nice because this book was actually adapted to be read by young people, and there's a longer, more difficult version by the same name and same author that other students can read. One of my favorite graphic novels to share with high schoolers is Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. It's a graphic novel by an Iranian-born French author. It's autobiographical comics of her time during the Islamic Revolution. It has themes of war, gender, violence, rebellion, shame, and pride. This is definitely a book for older students as it has some graphic content. Another wonderful graphic novel option is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, but adapted by Tim Hamilton. It's written in the typical comic book style, but it's the story we all know and love. And something that I love about this is that oftentimes once students read an adaptation of a longer novel, they want to read the same novel and they think they're getting away with something because they already know the story, but we're also getting away with something because we know that they're working on longer and more difficult sentence structures and learning higher levels of vocabulary. And finally, picture books. The Name Jar by Yan Suk Choi is about a young Korean girl who moves to America and tries to pick a new name to fit in with her friends, and along the way she realizes the importance of identity. Another one is A Nation Challenged, a visual history of 9/11 and its aftermath by the New York Times. And this has a lot of different forms of media. So it has maps, it has timelines, and it has first-person accounts as well as newspaper articles from when 9/11 happened. Finally, I want to talk about diversity. Starting in 2014, the number of diverse books being published increased substantially. And in 2016, the number jumped to 28%. 2018 showed that number steadily increasing, hitting 31%, which was the highest year on record since 1994. In 2017, Black, Latinx, and Native authors combined wrote just 6% of new children's books published. In 2018, the number was only 7%. Now it is our responsibility to choose reading materials that show our students that they can do anything they put their mind to, regardless of institutional barriers, and that we will still be there to help them every step of the way. If there's one thing we do know, it's that children need to see people like them represented in all forms of media, and the one thing that we can do is introduce literature that is by minorities, about minorities, and that does not minimize the struggles that their ancestors have gone through. It is not up to our students to do the legwork for equality, it's up to us. The one thing that we can definitively do is show up for our students. We can remind them of routine by providing read-alouds. We can remind them of our love and presence by being in those videos. And we can remind them that day after day, we will show up. Remember, your read-aloud video might be the nicest and most respectful way an adult spoke to your student that day. Anyways, thanks for coming and let me know if you have any questions. Bye!